And these are just some of the highlights of the school district, some things that we see going well around budgeting and the bond and this opportunity to create 21st century learning spaces. The opportunities we have, and when we look at our facilities, we're looking at these particular items around the environment, safety, making sure that we're making the investments in the right ways for our students. When we go on the next slide, so what's going on right now? So given the outcomes that we want for all of our students, there are certain impacts to the organization that we can't overlook. And our effort here is to get in front of these things, not look away, but really deal with them head on. And so these are the particular items that we want to do. I'm going to highlight that very first one. This is still around the core work around teaching and learning, around academics or standards-based instruction, and social emotional learning for all of our students. This outlines a particular environment, some things that we're dealing with. I'm going to ask Michelle to continue on this one. If you see these items, it connects very much to the previous presentation. These don't work in silos. The investments that we make really then, of course, reflect the outcomes we want to see for our students, but there's also the changing context that we have. So let me have Michelle continue on with this one to talk about some of the issues that we know we've been facing.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz and Board of Trustees. So as you can see, Dr. Cruz mentioned that we have our focus on academics and our social emotional learning for our students. Some of the challenges are declining enrollment. We've lost over 6,000 students, as you know, in the last several years, and continue a projected loss going into the future. You know what's going on with our recapture status. And then we have an aging infrastructure. Our average facility age is 47 years, and we have $4.2 billion in deferred maintenance and operations for our current facilities. So what our purpose with tonight is we need your direction in proceeding with starting a process to identify impacted campuses on February 25th at the board meeting. So when we look at investing in a stronger district on the, I believe it'd be your left, if we continue on the pathway we're on, we'll have campuses that are not as maximizing our efficiencies within our structures. We'll have less resources to attract high-quality teachers in those schools. They won't have the opportunity to get to collaborate with colleagues in their own professional learning and to design high-quality instruction in their classrooms. And then it also limits the electives and some programming that we can offer at some sites. If we invest in our future, looking over to the right, we're able to attract and retain high-quality talent. We're able to have provide greater programming and greater opportunities within those sites in areas or regions of our district. So as you know, and this is something you've all been asking for as we move forward, is to be successful in this endeavor. Okay, we need to look at all of our assets and all of our resources and analyze all of them. We want to be very transparent with our timeline, which we'll be going through here at the proposed timeline. We've also included a very comprehensive communication and engagement plan to go along with each stage of the process. And we have a lot of data sets that we can access now that we haven't had in the past and that we can use to review. And you can see them all listed here across here that we can look at. And you also have many of those attachments in your board docs. The other part is that that our decision points are aligned with our district policy for as we go forward with decision making. That these commitments are going to be very clear for campuses that are impacted, whether they're receiving students or they will be moving to new sites. We'll have very defined roles and responsibilities for district staff as we move forward and have a realistic vision for these new sites. And then we want to definitely leverage the existing work of different committees that have been putting in large amounts of time and analysis. As you can see in FabPack, the Boundary Committee and the Budget Stabilization Task Force. And then, of course, have it aligned with our 2019 FMP.
So with this one, just highlight again, the opportunity here is around creating these 21st century learning spaces for all our students, having as many students as we can in fully modernized high-tech facilities. It's not about closing, it's not about consolidating. Could that be an effect of what we're trying to do? Yes, But the intent is not just to look at FCA score and ESA scores independently, it's looking at this information collectively. And it's also taking on the work from the Budget Stabilization Task Force that addressed this. It's also taking the feedback that we've received from the Facilities Master Plan, with FABPAC, and also the Equity Subcommittee of FABPAC. So we're bringing these information pieces together to make sure that it's still about creating and providing 21st century learning spaces for as many students as we can. Allie the other day said we want to be better and stronger than we are today. So that's where I look at it from that perspective, the vision. It's extremely important. And Trustee President Rodriguez, when you talk about the board's role, that's it right there. Talking about the vision and not let it go to a very oversimplified conversation of cuts and deficit, which you've said many times and many board members have echoed that. It's about what's our opportunity here? What is it we can do for all of our students? And we really need to make sure that that vision is highlighted every step of the way, and then talk about the effect of the implementation. But it really has to begin with the vision. So with that, now, obviously, to make these things happen, we have to have an operational plan. It just doesn't happen, haphazardly, serendipitously. It's going to be some thoughtful approach to this work. So with that, we're going to have Matthias continue on with the operational pieces to this.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Matthias Segura, Operations Officer for the Austin Independent School District. So on slide 12, what you'll see is a roadmap. One of the things that we endeavored to do was to create a single sheet that showed what this process might look like and recognize that there are a lot of different components that are going to come into play. As you can see, what we're trying to show here is a process, multiple working groups, as well as a timeline. You can see here that we'll be leveraging the FABPAC through their process. We expect to have great dialogue with the board through the equity and inclusion board policy work that will occur over the next several months. And then we have this great planning opportunity with the City of Austin to truly identify what opportunities might be out there in the universe that we might be able to incorporate into our long-term planning. We've developed a process that's broken into 7 different phases: data collection and asset assessment, defining goals and process, developing scenarios, then testing the scenarios through an iterative process, a final recommendation, logistics and planning, and then finally implementation. And we'll go through those in detail as we move forward through the presentation. But the one thing I want to point out is this schedule does have us committed to come back through work sessions and present to y'all throughout this process. Our goal is to be transparent, be mindful of timelines, and recognize that this timeline allows us to properly support our students if we do make changes in campuses. If we're going to make improvements at any campus, we need to have time to design and then construct, which is kind of what sets the back end stage of this timeline. So moving forward onto page 13 or slide 13, just diving a little bit deeper into phase 1, data collection, which is what we're currently in. Certainly we have a lot of existing data sets that we're going to leverage. I can tell you, we're in a very, very great place regarding data. We've worked with the Service Center to develop intensive databases. We have all the great work that was done through the 2016 FMP, through the education suitability assessments, the facility condition assessment scores. We have academic mapping that we can leverage. So certainly a lot of information. Our goal, our outcome, is to identify if there's anything missing in this time frame. We need to understand if there are things that are missing and we need to go get, we need to make sure that we do it, and also complete the assessment. For each of these phases, we do also communicate our engagement strategy tied to it. And here's Renee.
Great. So Renee Tejas, Executive Director of Communication and Engagement. And our DCCE team has worked diligently at crafting a robust communication and engagement plan, which we've developed in tandem, side by side with the process decision points as they've been determined. And now that that's complete, we're going to continue to refine and update the alignment of that plan when necessary with the operational plan, all while keeping the commitment for awesome learning environments and better opportunities for all students centered to our messaging and our engagement efforts. So as the community conversations have already actually begun, we'll be meeting with key stakeholders, including district advisory bodies, community groups, and others in order to serve as the district sounding board on this particular initiative. And tonight and through the process, you'll find in every phase in the operations component, there's a corresponding communications and engagement component that complements the process, so you'll see that cadence throughout.
Thank you, Renee. So moving on to slide 15, we enter into phase 2, which is going to take place starting now, February 11th, into March. The key activities include this board work session. multiple meetings with the FABPAC to define the different data sets that will be implemented and considered, the regional strategy, and staff will begin developing the detailed work plan that will support this work. On February 25th, the goal would be for the board to approve moving forward to implement the process and then develop the methodology. Again, throughout the entire process, we'll be working with the FABPAC and also with the board to define and develop work policy. One of the key outcomes during this phase is a case study. One of the things that I think is critical about this process is that we develop a case study to communicate to the board how we intend to implement this methodology, right? We do not want to use existing schools. We want to go through an analysis to show you how the methodology would build up, what data sets would be considered, and what we expect to get out of that analysis. That analysis will be built upon regions within the city, not necessarily planning clusters. And because we're taking it up a level, we get to introduce more opportunities to address some of our challenges. As we move away from phase 2 and into the communication process.
At this early stage in the process, the key information that we want to hear from our communities is what might it look like to come out of this process with school communities that are stronger than they were before. To gain this feedback, we'll hold a series of board listening sessions to learn about community values to inform a set of guiding principles specific to any changes that may occur to a campus. We'll ask for ideas around programming and repurposing. And in addition to the meetings, we're asking for these board listening sessions for the board to play an active role in these listening sessions, for you trustees to participate in these meetings, as well as another opportunity we'll provide for input is an online platform called MindMixer, which will be providing with you with instructions on how to participate with and in that coming up. In a board update later this week. We think this is a great opportunity as the online platform we use during our budget stabilization discussions, and it's a great way for you to hear from your constituents who may not be able to make a particular meeting.
So moving into phase 3, which is the development of the scenarios. We're going to use the month of March to really have staff work with the FABPAC, and the idea is at the April 8th board work session to bring back these the methodology and the case study and to get feedback from the board and also communicate to you all what we've heard in the community. On April 22nd, we would ask the board to adopt the guiding principles, really come together and see if there are any changes to policy that we might need to consider, and then also the scenario criteria. It's very important that we're all in agreement as to what these goals and principles are so that once they're implemented and applied, we know how we got there. Certainly some of the ones that we might want to consider is regional utilization goal, transportation expense threshold, deferred maintenance reduction goal. You know, we're carrying a significant amount of deferred maintenance, and each of these scenarios we'll be able to communicate to you what the reduction in deferred maintenance might be over a period of time. As far as the outcomes go, establish preliminary regional scenarios, and then determine the preliminary list of schools potentially impacted. The reason that we're using the term impacted is because through this analysis, we're going to identify multiple opportunities across many facilities, many campuses, many schools, and it might be that campuses might receive programming or a different solution might occur. It's not necessarily consolidation or moving. So I want to make sure that's very, very clear. This holistic strategy allows for that discussion to come in because we're looking from the top down and not necessarily from the bottom up.
Okay, at this phase, community feedback from phase 2, which were our trustee listening sessions, will help inform our administration as it works collaboratively with FABPAC to develop viable regional scenarios. It's critical that the public understand what we've heard from them and how that information ultimately shapes the options that are going to be under consideration. At the April 8th work session, we will present to you a summary of what we've learned from the community, online and in person, and this will include community's thoughts on the potential guiding principles in order for you to know how the community has ranked them in rank order. And this will be offered up in anticipation of your adoption of the final set of guiding principles on April 22nd.
Thank you. So moving into phase 4, which will take place between May and June, we'll continue to have FABPAC workshops. We'll evaluate regional scenarios. It's very important to recognize that phase 4 and phase 3 work with one another. We're going to develop scenarios, we'll test them, and we'll go back and evaluate. So 3 and 4 really work hand in hand. At the May 6th board work session, the strategy would have us recommending regional scenarios. The outcomes tied to the scenario include confirming alignment with the district's purpose and community values. It's very, very important that at every single point along the way, we're going back and making sure that we're confirming that we are indeed putting students in a better place. That's incredibly important that we test that not only during the methodology phase, but also as we introduce the principles, and even after that before we get towards a recommendation. This all will be considered as part of the draft master plan addendum, which will be ultimately incorporated into the 2019 FMP.
We know that at some point toward the end of the third phase, we will begin to see preliminary and have a sense of the preliminary list of what schools may be impacted. When this becomes clear, we will begin to engage and communicate with our most impacted stakeholders that their school, maybe their community, may experience changes like repurposing, reassigning students, receiving students, adding exciting new programming, renovation for a 21st century space. So our engagement here is going to focus on training customer service staff on how to discuss issues with parents, equipping principals of impacted schools with information to respond to community and staff concerns, holding staff meetings with schools, and inviting families and staff to regional meetings to learn more about the changes their school may experience and get their feedback on the relative strengths and shortcomings of the scenarios that they're hearing about.
So phase 5, final recommendation between June and August. And June 17th, regular board meeting, our current strategy includes approval of the addendum, as I referenced in the previous slide, and ultimately a final recommendation tied into the 2019 FMP in August. The idea here is that the FAPAC is going to have a tremendous amount of work, and because they're currently tackling fine arts, CT, and athletics, campus capacity calculations, portable reduction strategies, and repurposing ideas. The idea is that if we tackle this, I want to give them some breathing room on the back end to finish the work. This work will certainly take priority. We'll begin development of the transition plans and then make sure that we're appropriately staffed to manage the logistics associated with them.
As administration coalesces around a final recommendation, we at this stage will be proactively crafting communications that outline the changes proposed for each reason and the reasons behind the vision of the better, stronger schools that we hope have taken hold. Presuming the board votes to approve the impacted schools addendum report, we'll work closely with human capital, school leadership, and finance departments to hold informational meetings for families and staff to answer questions and make sure they understand next steps and opportunities available to them.
So moving on to slide 23, phase 6, logistics planning and project development. This is the fall of this year. Key activities include identify campus teams. If there are going to be improvements on each campus or in the campuses that are considered or impacted, we want to make sure that we identify the key folks that are going to help us through this work. The construction management team will be moving through the design process during this time period. We'll finalize bus routes. We'll look at the campus improvement budgets. I do want to make sure that everybody understands and the trustees understand that with each of these scenarios, we're going to be looking at what the cash flows would be for any future improvements. Certainly we have funds in the 2017 bond. There are projects that we've identified for the next 10 years. And so each of these scenarios will be able to communicate to the trustees exactly what impacts we might have and what strategies we might need to consider to reallocate those funds through the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. We'll set move budgets and timelines and then proceed into phase 7.
So with what the process has developed here, we know we'll want to be communicating specific and micro impacts to families as we know them at this time. It will be important to communicate that timeline to families so they know what to expect. We understand our families will need to be able to plan and make the best decision for their students, and we're committed to providing accurate and timely information to them in doing so. And the changes can also include providing them, of course, with a wide array of quality choice options that they have available, that any AISD family has available to them.
So in phase 7, it's implementation and construction. We're now in the new year, January 2020 through October 2020. This is really we're executing. We've identified the contractors that might be doing some of the work during the summertime. We've prepped the campuses that would be going through these changes, and we will continue to support them once the school year starts.
At this point, our commitment to better learning environments and opportunities for all students is really starting to take form. During this phase, we'll look at what went well with Norman and Sims to develop our lesson plans, always learning from the past. What is the key for our families to understand that AISD has invested in the success of every school, and that students who experience change will have access to stronger academic and physical learning environments. And we know that some families will be adjusting to a new school community, so we want to offer extra support to ensure they begin to feel at home in their new school community. We've done that a little bit with some of the schools that are currently being housed together, like the Cocoa film night that we had. And with that, I would like to invite folks who may be watching to please visit www.austinisd.mindmixer.com, where we will currently have this topic open for discussion. And then please join us for a conversation and share your thoughts with us, because on Wednesday of this week, February 13th, we'll be hosting a Facebook Live chat with Dr. Cruz at 1:30 p.m., and your comments on MindMixer will help shape that particular discussion.
So on the last slide, next steps, February 25th, board votes to authorize the implementation of the process, the proposed process as communicated. On April 22nd, the board votes to adopt the guiding principles and scenario criteria. And ultimately on June 17th, the board votes to authorize changes to impacted schools. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Trustees, I'm going to just make a little bit of a statement and then read Trustee Anderson's comments and then open it up. And Trustee Wagner, I know you had your hand up. I'm sorry. First of all, I'd like to encourage the dialogue for the trustees so that we can plan to work effectively on the draft plan and proposed roadmap on the clarity of the board's role here. We've had discussions about criteria. We've had discussions about other things. So I just want to make sure that all that is being coordinated into this draft plan and proposed roadmap. So I want to also read a statement from Trustee Anderson, Letitia Anderson, who couldn't be here with us tonight, but she emailed me, so I'm going to read it verbatim so that it can go into the record, into the input of the Board of Trustees. So my apologies for not being able to attend tonight due to bronchitis. I'd like to thank the board and administration for all the hard work that you do. Historically, Austin and Austin ISD have been built on inequities between black and brown communities and white ones. In the process of closing schools due to low enrollment caused by forced integration, gentrification, and other decisions the school district has made in the past, we must turn this around and use this opportunity to be equitable. If closing schools is a way to save the district, then we must be mindful of which schools need to be closed. The process with this needs to proceed equitably and without bias. I will end this statement with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. So, Trustee Wagner.
All right, that was a tough act to follow. I feel like I need to give that a moment to sit before I proceed. So just a few questions going through. First off, before I launch into questions, though, I want to say thank you. I think I've been asking and pleading for a while to please give us a comprehensive plan that connects all the dots, inclusive of communication, facilities, and academics. And it's really refreshing to see a clearly articulated plan. So thank you very much for all of the work that's gone into this and for the coordination between the teams to get us to this point. Very appreciative of the work getting here, and very excited about the fact that we are looking at this as a holistic reinvention of the district and doing the right things for our students rather than just a reductive measure. So first off, I think I wanted to understand when, at the highest level, when you're saying that the board will vote on February 25th to authorize implementation of the process, typically we wouldn't vote on an administrative process, so I think I just wanted to understand further, is that, are we authorizing any funding implications within this process? What specifically would we be authorizing at that point?
Sure. It's really authorizing to move forward with the process. So it's not necessarily, it's just we want to share, get feedback on the process, but it's basically a readiness. Excuse me, I put them in my mouth. It's basically a readiness Are we ready to do this? That's really what the check is.
Okay. Again, I'm not quite sure why that requires a board vote. I guess because I'm looking to you as the superintendent of the organization to
Absolutely.
to lead that and make that recommendation and carry forward. by directing
Absolutely,
your
and I
staff
do
that
think
way.
we are. I want to make sure, because we also have new board members on. There have been a lot of previous conversations. So from the board's role, what we had talked about in previous discussions is the board aligned to what we're doing now? So it's really just discussion time. But I do think this is the right time. I do. It's something we have to pick up about 21st century learning spaces, modernized sites, because there's more to come. This isn't it. So this is the opportunity. And so it's about clarity around those opportunities. And basically are we ready to take that next step?
Okay. So first question for Mr. Segura. So you mentioned regions versus planning clusters. I think I have some rough sense in my mind what that means, but I was wondering if you could maybe articulate that a little bit more fully and what exactly that means and the impact that would be for communities.
Sure. I'm more happy to do so. So in the 2017 FMP, there were planning clusters. I believe there were 27 in total. For elementary schools, I believe there were between 3 and 5 elementary schools per cluster. And so when you evaluate facilities and only have the ability to work within 3 or 4 or 5, your ability to solve a problem becomes limited. And so the strategy that we wanted to take on was to come up a couple levels and look at regions within the city and establish goals at the regional level, and then understand how we could leverage our assets to meet those goals. So it gives us some flexibility. I can't tell you precisely where those regions are going to begin and end. I'd like to work with the FABPAC to define what those are. I can tell you that I believe we'll probably end up between 10 and 14 elementary schools, depending on geographic region and kind of how they build up. But that's the purpose of them. If that helps.
I appreciate you explaining that more fully. I think the other questions I had are, well, partly in terms of campus support, and I guess, Ms. Che or Dr. Che? Okay, okay.
It's actually Cavazos.
So, sorry, Cavazos. I'm catching up. So I'm mismatching all of it. So, in terms of like support for school campuses, and I imagine a lot of that will come from your office as well as from communications. And so I just wanted to understand, I heard sort of the communications and engagement support angle, but I wanted to understand really what we're going to be doing from your teams to really make sure that the campuses are fully integrated, that campus administrators have the tools that they need to be able to really build those relationships with their new campus communities, implement the programs correctly, those types of things as well, in addition to maybe other mechanisms, Mr. Tejas, that you had in mind too, beyond things like a movie night, or understanding that we're talking about what could be very disparate campus communities that we're combining, and how do we really start to build those relationships? And
And that's a great question, and we're definitely committed to this, supporting those campuses so that they're able to welcome families and students and their staff in optimal ways. And so we really will deploy our team to provide, and we've been doing it through coaching and actionable feedback for those campuses as they're problem solving through this. The other piece is working with our campuses that are currently in the modernization process and providing them, kind of the roadmap of, okay, here's the professional development that you want with your staff on how to teach in these new spaces. Here's how to welcome families as they come into these new learning environments. So we'll be working very hand in hand with academics throughout that as we look at the programming too that will be needed, if there's any needed to be added at impacted sites.
thank you. Anything to add, Mr. Tejas, on that one?
Just from the get-go, on day one, even like we did from the first day of school, we had assemblies, and we worked with some of our partners here to help us plan them. And there was a wrapper, and they talked about combining and becoming one in that process, as well as invitations for meet the principal night, meet the teacher night, meet the classroom night, and things like that, as opposed to the movie night where you kind of have the option to kind of engage kind of more formalized processes that will actually bring the campus communities together.
Okay. And to the end too, and that's a great segue to my next question, which is for you, Mr. Tejas, and that's too, like, in terms of the different communication points with the public that you listed throughout the presentation, I was curious, first off, how we are really going to effectively reach campus communities. I'm a little nervous about my mixer because when we utilize that during the FMP and bond planning process, I really didn't see a really deep utilization of that tool. I think it's an interesting tool, but I really didn't see us promote it effectively, or really to the extent that I think the larger public knew to access it or knew that that was the best vehicle or venue for them to provide input. Instead, what we tended to see, I think, is more input coming from surveys or in-person sessions. So I think a heavy reliance on my mixer makes me a little nervous, as opposed to it being sort of a accessory tool to our deeper engagement efforts.
And my apologies if I made it seem like that's the only the media platform that we'll be using, but we will continue to use our other platforms that exist, Twitter, Facebook, the Facebook Live, and all of those things, so that all of the input is coming in to us, and that the questions that are being asked are answered. We also have a phone hotline that we could be able to activate like we did during the FMP, where people could call and ask their questions specifically, always an email address that we have as part of our standard kind of boilerplate ways that they can communicate and get questions asked and answered if they have them.
Great. And also, too, I wondered about like communicating the timeline to the public, talking about the public understanding their feedback will impact scenario development and analysis. How would you propose that we really get those messages across, or what tactics are you planning to implement to do that work?
To make sure that at any stage in the timeline, we're communicating where we're at in the timeline?
Where we're at, or also being able to sort of close that feedback loop of making sure that the public has a clear understanding of where to provide feedback, who it's being received and heard by, and we're being able to let them know that we received your feedback and this is how we've utilized it. So really being able to have that complete loop.
So one of our things as we developed the plan is that we really wanted to engage at points where there's something to engage about. And I think the answer to that is closing the feedback loop, so that those that we've collected and know that have asked a question or given feedback, we give them the answers to how we have received the feedback, what the results of the feedback were, and what we're going to be doing with the feedback, so that they understand that their input is part of the entire process and understand that clearly. Point taken would be a good point in our communication back out to them to emphasize what's left in the timeline, so that they can kind of decide at what points if they have a busy schedule, may or may not want to choose to engage with us again.
And do you plan to employ similar tactics that we used during the FMP and the bond in terms of reaching
Certainly,
constituents?
yeah. That's the blueprint is based off of the ways that we engage through those activities
Okay.
that we were successful with. Yeah.
Okay. Because I think one of the things I'm a little cautious about is that I know that many communities, or many of our parents and other constituents, have very busy lives, and so they tend to not pay attention or invest time in engaging if something doesn't seem to directly affect them. And so since we're starting with a process that is by design ambiguous at this point, to allow the time and space to really explore what the right options of decision-making is down the line, those campus communities may not necessarily know that at some point that they could be impacted. And so I guess what I'm just trying to make sure of is that we are reaching widely and deeply enough at this point to make sure that folks understand the long-term vision of what's coming, the potential impact for the entire district, and how to really get involved and have their needs and concerns heard early in the process. So it's a big lift, and so that's why I'm asking a lot of more probing questions, just to find out how we're going to get there.
And I think it will be important for us to completely kind of utilize the trustee meetings that we're suggesting that you guys be a part of, and I think the mere presence of you will show, because I do agree, it's not real until it's real for anybody, right? And so if we're talking about better school facilities or programs for all students, now's the time to begin saying that, because the outcome will be a better result for all students, which means all of our families will be affected.
Great. And when you say trustee board listening sessions, and I apologize if I missed it when you were talking, but could you explain one more time exactly what that means, a board listening session?
They would be our community meetings, specific kind of way that we would go about them, yet to be outlined, but at the forefront, kind of, normally you might see staff at the front and kicking off the meeting and leading the meeting. This time we're going to be asking the trustees to be playing that role with the support of the Communication Engagement Office behind what it is, the platform, the kind of design of the meeting that we come up with, so that the constituents that show up at the meeting are actually engaging, asking the questions to, hearing from the trustees in a more highlighted role.
And will any of that meeting, like as far as like the ownership of the meeting, I know you said facilitation, but I'm also thinking too, would that be something that you would envision having someone from district administration standing alongside of us?
Oh, certainly.
Co-presenting, or, okay, because I think that would be a more advantageous position to share those roles rather than just coming from a single trustee's point of view. And then very last question, on the FabPack piece, we're talking about a pretty heavy lift in a very short amount of time for FabPack. In my recent conversations with my FabPack appointees, I'm not sure that they're aware of just how tall of an order is coming their way. Have there been any discussions with the FabPack up to this point to kind of prepare them and engage their availability and to do the work?
Sorry. I apologize. So we met with the tri-chairs and communicated this plan. We didn't want to get too far ahead of it. We wanted to get y'all's feedback. We do have a FabPack meeting tomorrow night, which I plan to present the timeline and get their feedback. Based on what I heard from the tri-chairs, there was a commitment to oversee the process, be a part of it. I think what we need to do now is to really line out what that work looks like, which is why in the plan we're actually proposing that some of their current work kind of gets pushed back a little bit, so that we can kind of take this on and give them a little bit more time to focus on this at hand. So I can tell you a lot more tomorrow afternoon after our conversation.
Yeah, well, I think this is work that from my understanding, the FabPack has been eager to take on for quite some time. So so hopefully that will be well received, and we can beg for their time to help us yet again in pushing the work forward. So that's all my questions. Thank you.
I did talk to a couple of FabPack, and they were ready. They wanted to do more, actually. Some of them. Now, I didn't check with all, but we'll check tomorrow. I did want to highlight that these sessions are similar to what we did when the facilities master plan was being developed, from the initial phase, that movement, to the planning, to the actual bond. So there were board members who were present at those, and we're just borrowing from that idea and bringing that back. And the board had also discussed being much more engaged and connected with this process, also the strategic plan process as well. But given, and also now the equity conversation. So given all of that, I do think there probably needs to come together and just discuss the capacity of it and where will board members step in or not, or it's just available. But that's what we were thinking, is bringing that back, and it just seemed that the board members wanted to do that again in this participate in this way. But it's obviously administration will prepare all the materials, we'll have the talking points. We also use very similar system of having these presentations with every CAC, Campus Advisory Council, every faculty meeting, and every PTA. So there's just an automatic infrastructure there that we kick in when we do some of the big items, not everything, but certainly with the facility master plan, the bond. We use that process for internal constituencies. This is much more for external. And there are other pieces as well when we meet with our delegation, when we meet with other leaders in our community.
So I have 4 trustees who want to ask questions so far. Trustee Ashe is next, Trustee Matthias, Trustee Teish, Trustee Cindy Anderson, and then Trustee Singh, so 5. And then Amber, you're going to go last. Okay. Kristen.
So it's a Post-it note palooza in my little book here. I have a few questions, and I appreciate very much Trustee Wagner. You answered some of them, so I can pull some of my Post-it notes off. So a lot of what my questions are around the community engagement, and the reason that I ask these questions is for a couple of reasons. I know this isn't the district's first foray into talking about, and I very much appreciate that you're saying that there could be other outcomes. And I still want to acknowledge, I think that the one that everybody's probably the most interested in is consolidations. And I feel like while it's maybe not said in here, it's kind of everywhere implied that that's what we're talking about in the presentation we received and the community engagement around it and what that looks like. And the facility master plan does have a piece in there that has the one page out of the hundreds of pages that are in there that has to do with the consolidations. There are the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And my question regarding what you're going to be asking of FabPac, are you asking them to start with that document and move forward, or are you looking to them to go more big picture? The reason I asked that question being we keep referencing the FabPac process, and the FabPac process was over a good 2 years. But I think it feels like we're trying to squeeze the same amount of community engagement into what feels like about 6 months or 4 months, because we have to vote on the principles on April.
So I'll respond first because it started as community engagement, but I think because you
Kinda went both
ultimately
ways.
ended on the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So those are outlined in 2017 FMP. The way those are written, they're written to really speak to a specific campus. If you look at them, they kind of say these are criterion to analyze when looking at a specific campus. Our strategy is to look more holistically and look at a region and figure out, okay, what can we do at a regional level to improve the health of a region? And I think through that process, we're actually going to be asking the trustees to provide that input. The FabPac will provide input on the regional components. We'll test data sets with them, and we'll take the feedback from the trustees and then build it into a methodology and ultimately into scenarios. And we'll test those scenarios with the FabPac. We're not going to ask them to make those kind of detailed finite criteria. We would ask the board to make that through the policy, through the criteria and the principles that we're actually asking y'all to approve in April. So that's why it's a little bit different. I would suggest that this strategy is probably very similar to what we did for the 2017 bond when we transitioned from the FMP into the bond itself, and we analyzed a lot of different ways to build up a bond into $1 billion, and we developed models, we looked at scenarios, we tested those scenarios with the FabPac, they provided feedback. It was very iterative. I suspect this process is going to be very similar to that. So I hope that answers your question at least partially, but we're not going to ask them to go back and start there. We're going to ask them to start a little bit higher and actually ask the board for that feedback specifically.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, that by April 22nd, you're going to have the FabPac create a higher level strategy or a set of thoughts around being more efficient with a region that then the trustees are going to be putting criteria into place?
So I think the roadmap communicates this, I think, fairly well, which is it's challenging because there's a lot of things coming together. So if we look back to the roadmap specifically, which is on slide, slide 12, the idea is that, through work with the board, we would bring in the principles and criteria as determined by the board. Now, these criteria might suggest, for a specific area, we want the utilization to be 90%, right? Well, that would yield a certain amount of seats within an area. We might say we want to reduce deferred maintenance by 10%, which would be, hundreds of millions of dollars. So those things we could look at a regional basis and figure out tactically how we can look at all of our assets to achieve that goal. And that process is going to yield multiple scenarios, right? You can take $200 million in deferred maintenance out of 15 different schools many different ways. Now, each one of those is going to have a different strategy, different implementation, and different impact on students. And so the idea is the methodology itself is going to be developed by staff. The inputs and, the criteria and the principles will be provided by the trustees, and the kind of evaluation of these scenarios as we go through them will be done by the FabPac. So the idea is that all this kind of comes together in phase 3, which is the development of the scenarios, and then we'll work with the FATPAC in an iterative process to go back and forth. So
Okay.
it's a lot, and I recognize that it is, and our goal is to be very clear with the data sets and expectations at every single meeting, which is why this detailed work plan that's going to be finalized in earnest over the next week and a half is so important. I mean, that to me is going to lay out every single step between here and in August, really until 2020.
Okay, and so to all my FabPack friends who are watching right now, because they were instructed to this evening, they were told they needed to watch tonight, they're going to take a very much 180-degree turn to stop looking at fine arts, CTE, and athletics to move to this part, to move to campus, the efficient use of campus facilities.
I would say that this will take a different priority. We will still touch on it every time we meet. There are a lot of things that we cover in every single meeting, but this will become the focus of the meetings. Because they've done so much great work already, I think that we're in a really good place. Our consultants have been working very, very closely with the FATPAC. We've had multiple great day-long meetings. So I think we're in a pretty good place. So it'll be a lot of smaller types of discussion with them, while this will be the majority. I don't think that we'll go away from it.
Thank you very much. We're now reconvening. We had a minor medical emergency and wanted to make sure everything was okay before we started back up. I just want to reiterate again with Trustee Ashe, you're up next, and then it's Trustee Matthias, Trustee Tice, Trustee Anderson, Trustee Singh, Trustee Ellens. So given the time, I just want to check in with the board about whether you're interested in submitting your questions or that you want to continue asking questions of the administration while they're here. So any thoughts? Yes, Trustee Matthias.
I think it's important for the sake of transparency that we continue the conversation. For those who'd like to submit questions, I think we'd be happy for them to do so, but I think it's important for the community to hear this discussion, despite the fact of it being 11:40 p.m.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Cruz, anything? Okay. Then Trustee Ashe.
I need to, hang on, I'm getting my brain back where we were in this conversation. I apologize. Kind of jumping back into the expectations for the FABPAC committee, the Facilities and Bond Planning Advisory Committee. So I know that they have been scheduled out with subcommittee meetings and visioning meetings out through the end of April, and that they have been making accommodations to get that work done. So are they going, I think that I just want to make sure that we have been very clear.
Yep.
That I feel like knowing the work that they are doing, that while I understand the importance of what we're asking them to do, and I know that it will be very valuable, I want to acknowledge that we're asking quite a lot of them, and I have some hesitations that it's even possible for them to be able to complete what we're asking.
I don't disagree that it's going to be a lift. I think that tomorrow's discussion with them will inform what comes about in the detailed work plan and what they're comfortable taking on. I can tell you that, the work, that they do certainly will have to complement the work that y'all do as trustees. And I suspect what I'll do is maybe provide feedback to Dr. Cruz and communicate to the trustees kind of what we received in the FATPAC meeting tomorrow night. But what my objective is to communicate the roadmap, the expectation, kind of also communicate, how I expect us to get there, and then receive feedback from them and make adjustments as appropriate.
Now, I kind of want to jump to some community engagement questions. You were kind enough to provide us with the community engagement plan. And when I'm looking through here, and as I kind of went through and starred some things, and you have listed in here as two of the community engagement things, actually the budget discussions that are set for next week. And it has them listed as opportunities for people to provide feedback. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, those budget meetings are going to be an opportunity for whoever goes to them to go to the meeting, to be able to express their feelings. We know that these community conversations have already begun. And so we had a robust communication and engagement plan related to the budget. And then Matthias brought forth his timeline, and I received that mid-January. And so we saw the convergence of kind of everything that's going to need to be able to happen. And so it is a budget meeting, but through these community conversations, we did not want to limit or kind of censor somebody's ability to express their opinions of what they're hearing and how that could impact the budget and or the process that we've lined forward for each of those.
Okay. So then really the only ones that you have targeted for this specific conversation are the trustee listening sessions, which there are 2 of. Is that correct?
Correct?
And so 1 north and 1 south.
We have not decided the regional direction of them.
Okay.
They
But
will,
there's only 2.
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
The line below that I think says there's an opportunity for us to add more at the will of the trustees as we work out with you guys what it is you'd like to see and your willingness to participate and help us with those.
So, and I'm kind of going to jump back in kind of a same line of question that Trustee Wagner had brought up earlier, along the lines of that when we start talking about using the FabPack model for community engagement and making sure people feel like they're a part of this process. Because when we start talking about consolidations or efficient use of facilities or changes that can impact either where a student goes to school or what services they receive at that school, that is a very important touch point for families and students. And I'm trying to see in my head how we're providing enough opportunities before we as trustees are expected to vote on something that's going to have such significant impacts across the district that people will feel like, because I see in here we also have things listed that, for example, the FabPack meetings are listed as part of the community engagement, even though it's not. I think the way it's set up, only 5 people can speak at the beginning, and it's not a back and forth. It just seems very limited to how people can engage with the district on something that I feel pretty confident everybody's going to be very passionate about. And so while I feel like this is certainly, I can tell that a lot of work went into this, and I don't want to diminish that. What I do want to do is make sure that we're providing ample opportunities for people to be able to be heard and to, because when I just have this very specific recollection of saying, okay, we're going to come and we're going to present these options. How do you feel about that? People would provide impact. We would take it back. We would process it. We would make some changes, not make other changes, then go back again. Okay, these are some of the changes we've made based on what you've heard from. How do you feel about that? And it was a back and forth for quite a long time. And so I have some reservations that we're going to be able to get all of that done before April 22nd.
The engagement that you speak of was driven by a process that allowed for that. And so when we received the timeline and process, we then crafted around that engagement that we thought could be as feasible and engaging as possible. And so that's the product that you've seen before you. We'd be happy to have a further discussion on where we can kind of input further engagement, and or there could be robust engagement that we actually ask a question that people are being asked in the process, but the engagement is informed by the process that admittedly is short.
Right. And then the other part that I see when we start talking about leveraging the existing data sets, we really don't have any. One of the things that we've talked quite a bit about is boundaries and the effectiveness of those, but there's really not. Is that going to be a part of the discussion around that? But because I don't see it in here anywhere.
Yeah, so the idea is the goals around boundaries would come out of the policy work discussions that the trustees would have. The challenge we have is, the Boundary Advisory Committee does the work. They implement the boundary changes that the administration kind of sets them forth and has them complete. But as we look at different scenarios, and we're evaluating 10 or 12 different schools within a region, and we look at different ways to improve the health of that region, there are a variety of ways to do it. And I think once you begin to examine if this school changes in some significant way, how would the boundaries change? Now, we wouldn't be able to tell you definitively that this line would be here, this line would be there. What we can say is, if it was looked at in this fashion, we might be able to get closer to some goals that the board has set. Because it's very difficult to even have that conversation unless we know what we're trying to get to, which is why this board policy work is so important. And so it's in there, but again, that discussion is going to be set by y'all's feedback to us as part of this board policy work. And so, that's why it comes in as part of the scenario. So once we're in the scenarios, I can say, based on what we're trying to achieve, we can improve this region, and it's likely that these boundaries would change in this manner, but it wouldn't actually occur administratively until we went through the Boundary Advisory Committee process, which would be in the fall after the decision was made. It's kind of the chicken and the egg. It's very difficult to start with something unless we have parameters to actually move towards. So
Okay.
that's how it's embedded in there. And again, as part of the detailed work plan, it'll be teased out.
And then I guess my next question, would be for our officers. Is there a plan either in board ops or something like that to discuss criteria? Because that is a new one. I don't think we've had that on any of our previous discussions at board operations meetings.
Well, and I think that part of this conversation is designed to really get some sort of consensus around precisely what the board's role is, because as I was going to comment a little bit later, I think there's some different interpretations of how much of a role the board will play in criteria as opposed to just an equity policy, as opposed to some of the other things that this conversation will need to determine how much involvement there needs to be, and then how that can be scheduled out over the next several months in a work plan, especially considering that February is pretty much already booked with hearings and, grievances and retreats and so forth. And so it's really going to be dependent on, I think, the outcome of this discussion, and then it will absolutely be on the board ops agenda as to how we need to
So what that looks
to
like.
pair out that work, to make sure we have sufficient time to do each of the aspects that the board is going to own, so to speak. Unless, Trustee Ellens, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, because honestly, this is the first time that we're hearing that this is an expectation. So there has been no effort up to this point, but it's definitely worth listening to what people want to do, how you want to fast track it, how you want to do things so that we can help get that going however you guys want to do it.
Good. I guess just my final thoughts are, I know that this, I'm like I said, I appreciate and know that what this is doing is in the grand interests of what is a governance issue, and that we would want to be moving forward with that and using our facilities efficiently to best use taxpayer dollars and our very limited resources to the best of our ability. I do have great concern for the timeline that we have set forward in an effort to make sure that we're doing this in a way that takes the public with us on this journey, that they feel a part of the decisions that we're making, and that they feel that their input really and truly does have an impact on policies and parameters and guidelines and all of these really pretty flowery words that we keep using to discuss these things. So I don't want to diminish the work in any way say thank you very much, and I'll be hopeful
Trustee Matthias, then Trustee Tyke.
Thank you all for your presentation. What struck me was we have a phrase in English of not seeing the forest for the trees. The presentation was for me an example of the superintendent with his forest vision and the administration working in the trees. So I'm going to try to avoid the trees and all the details. And first of all, just laud what we heard from our superintendent. I think that's the vision that we need to be lifting up. The real opportunity of placing our kids in 21st learning spaces, I think is the vision. I don't think there's anyone around us who will disagree with the value of that. Very cool. But I want to respond to Mr. Segura's question of what's missing and what's been presented to the board. And I think I've come up with a list of 10 points that a person could wrap some thought around. The first thing that could be missing here, transparency and engagement. I'm the king of euphemisms myself. Yesterday when it was raining, I referred to it as liquid sunshine. I refer to sports teams as the winning team and the learning team. I'm the king of euphemisms, so I appreciate a good euphemism. I'm not sure that our community, though, appreciates the euphemisms that we're using here. That is to say, the way that we're wrapping words around this and the opportunities that are here, what I fear is that what I'm hearing, at least in my district, District 2, are persons who are telling me, call it what it is. And if schools are going to be closed, tell us schools are going to be closed. What we heard this evening from the superintendent is this is not about closures and this is not about consolidation. This is about providing 21st century learning spaces. But if there are closures that are going to be part of this process, how do we communicate that? If indeed that's the case, and I'm not saying that there is. So personally, I launched 4 hashtags this afternoon. 2 of them, I really believe that this process is going to lead us to a hashtag better AISD and to a hashtag stronger AISD. I deserve no credit for those. That's really, I mean, your presentation talks about how it's going to make our district better and stronger. But the other 2 hashtags that I launched this afternoon were AISD consolidation, yikes, if indeed that's part of this, and hashtag right-sized AISD. If we're talking efficiencies, the people in District 2 are asking me if we can be real about it. I relay that to you. The title that is below my face right now on the television says exactly what we have here, Planning for Efficient Use of Campus Facilities, which leads people to believe that the board is probably talking about renting out extra classrooms or doing something to more efficiently use our campus facilities. And that's not what we're doing here at midnight. And if we had just put if we'd put something else on tonight's agenda, we would have more than 1 parent in attendance here at midnight. So I just lift that up as a challenge for us. I don't think that we want to be perceived in any way as misleading the community. Our community, I think it's fair to say that many persons in the community will not come to meetings on efficiency. They will come to meetings on possible school consolidations or closures. Just so that the community is not feeling duped at the end of all of this, I already fear that people are disappointed. The agenda that we have online says we'd be discussing this at 9:10, and a person could say, the board is discussing it at midnight, what gives, right? They could point and say, the materials that you've shared with us are not online. There's enough blame already that I think we just need to really be thoughtful about how it is that we continue forward with respect to our engagement with the community. Number 2, the second thing that could be missing, an explanation of inefficiencies in the Austin ISD. I tutor 6th grade math. 6th graders get it. One of their TEKs is to be able to solve real-life problems involving proportional relationships. A is to B as C is to D. 6th graders could figure this out. The Sci-Fair ISD, just pulling an example here, has 116,000 students and 56 elementary schools. A sixth grader could give us the answer to this question. If we said, if the Cypher ISD has 116,000 students in 54 elementary schools, how many elementary schools should the Austin ISD need for, say, 80,000 students? The answer to that question, I think, is sobering. That's a conversation on efficiency. So if there's some way for us to be able to help, the slide that you showed is one thing. It was a good visual. I want to compliment you for that, showing the 3 schools consolidated into one. It's a masterful slide, but it's very conceptual. That is, I think we need to take a real message out to the taxpayers of Austin on the inefficiencies, if indeed there are inefficiencies, that are causing this. Cypher ISD again, I think the math is telling. Third thing that could be missing is an explication of our district's commitment to equity. I'm not sure I was seeing or sensing that a lot in this presentation. The last tweet that I sent out this afternoon had 2 maps side by side, one of where our ECO-DIS students are, our socioeconomically disadvantaged students are in the Austin ISD, and the other of where the empty seats are in our district. And if you look at those 2 maps, they look very similar, which has prompted conversations, at least in District 2, on equity. If indeed there are conversations on consolidations or closures, and I'm not saying that there are, but if there are, then how do we do this in a way where it doesn't appear that the brunt of this is borne by Title I schools and or by schools in East Austin? Number 4, another possible item that could be missing in all of this is a definition of community. I say that because in District 2, we have a lot of really hardworking parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs to be able to support their families. And their voices are often not felt in the same way at community meetings as perhaps other parents with more resources, with more language skills, etc. So I'm left wondering what all this means, because we do a tremendous job of engaging those who show up. You know, how do we, if we're going to be real about, engaging those who are most affected by this, then I'll look forward to seeing what you all come up with that in that respect. Especially knowing that when we engage the community, and when we talk about community values, as if the community were monolithic, but as we start talking about that, there is going to be a large part of the community that will want to maintain the status quo. We're trying to rename, we took a board action a year ago to rename schools that are currently named after Confederate soldiers. We're still struggling through that. So the thought of increased efficiencies is not going to be something that is an easy conversation for many communities. I think that your closing slide captured that so well. It was an image of Austin. There are many of us, when I moved to Austin, it didn't contain that boardwalk in your image, and it didn't contain all those high towers. I remember a very different Austin, and I have a feeling that many of the constituents in Austin ISD are going to be holding on to memories of District 2 schools and perhaps other schools throughout the district that are very different from this vision that we want to hold up of very different Austin ISD and how cool that really will be. Number 5. I wish I could speed through these a little more quickly. Another thing that could be missing is an explication of the process and how it is that this process in the end will be more data-driven rather than given to the loudest voices and or to politics. I say that only because I love seeing, and I mean, you talk about the data that we're going to be gathering, which is so tremendous, but we want to acknowledge as well that this group of 9 persons is elected by various constituencies, and so politics always play into their decisions, it seems. Is there any way that you, as administration and staff, can help us through this process so that at the end we can look back and say with great content that we made the right decision for our kids? Number 6, one thing that could be missing is how it is that we might respond to this constituent concern that all of this is so extremely rushed in the eyes of some, that this board is going to be asked to be acting on something by June, which means that we're working backward from that, which we're essentially giving ourselves some 4 months before the board takes some kind of action. And that's at least one comment I was hearing last night from a District 2 resident is wait a minute, I'm understanding from what I'm seeing online that y'all are going to be taking action on some really serious things within 4 months. Number 7, regional solutions. This is the first time in this trustee's nearly 7 years on the board, over 6 years on the board, that we've ever talked about regions. So you're going to have to help us to understand what you mean by that. I apologize for the sidebar, but I was asking if I missed something in terms of, what do we mean by a region? Do these regions align with anything that currently exists, like vertical teams or single-member districts or anything else? When I hear about regional solutions, I don't know what that means, but it makes me nervous when I look at those maps of where our ECHO-DIS students are and where our under-enrolled schools are, et cetera, that regional solutions are going to be felt by some communities in a much more poignant way than others. Number 8, another thing that could be missing is the place of boundary changes in all of this. I suspect that it's implied in all of this, but those are some tough conversations. And if we're having all these tough conversations, is there some way that we'll be injecting that into the conversation? Number 9, another thing that could be missing is the role, and this has been hinted at by others, the role of this board, but also of the FABPAC and of the Boundary Advisory Committee and others, so that it's clear up front what it is that we're doing, so that we're not duplicating efforts, so that we're not stepping on one another, so that, I guess the duplication of efforts is my primary concern there. Finally, number 10, and then I will shut up. The 10th thing that could be missing from this is really an explanation of the win-wins. And this takes us back to the forest. If this is an opportunity for our students to get them into 21st century learning spaces, it's an opportunity not only for them, but also for the communities that surround all of our schools. If we were to be able to think of how we can create win-win-win situations, not just for our district, which needs to maximize its resources, but also for our students, but also for those communities, if we can really go to these communities with the sincere message that as communities we are able to dream about how it is that these properties could be repurposed if indeed schools were consolidated or closed. That could be exciting for some communities. In East Dawson and District 2, we're talking about affordable housing or the lack thereof. If the district were able to dedicate some properties or to somehow help this situation, it seems it would be a win for the communities. It would be a win for our district. It would be a win for the families who are no longer able to afford being in Austin. So I'm not necessarily looking for comment, simply just wanted to be able to, Mr. Segura asked what could be missing or what's missing. Those are 10 things that could be missing.
Thank you. This is an excellent preliminary plan, but I'm concerned why we got it this evening at around, 6 o'clock or earlier. Dr. Cruz, why did we get this so late? Because we're having to react to it. Trustee Mathias, excellent questions, but, this is the first I've seen of it. Was it on board docs?
It actually is in board docs, and it was sent to the board on Friday.
Sent Friday.
Of last week.
So
Correct.
my secretary doesn't check her emails every single day, and that would be me. So there's a lot of information here, and I really, really appreciate staff getting this all together, but I share Trustee Ashe's concerns and Trustee Mathias's concerns about the short timeline here. Now, I'm going to ask Dr. Cruz, is this short timeline predicated on the need for more money for the 2019-2020 school year? Why are we being given 6 months to try to address all the emotion around possibilities in here? I don't understand that. There's not enough time for community engagement. We've got an excellent community engagement team, but they can't do everything. And the board members are going to be expected to do things, and I'm assuming that we will have the assistance of our community engagement people. We've got a small number of those people, very good people, but and we have busy schedules too. So I don't know how all of this is going to be accomplished. I'm just curious as to why this is the timeliness of all this, considering we have such an emotional topic to deal with. Because when we start messing with people's schools, we are messing with people's communities, we're messing with people's psyches, et cetera, et cetera. And some of our communities, as Trustee Mathias has so eloquently said, are tired of being messed with. by the school district and by the city and so forth, but a lot by the school district. Previous administrations, previous boards, not this board, not this administration. We're trying to do things right now, but this timeline, I don't even know, I don't know if I'm available. I'm going to be out of town for about a week, going to a conference in DC in March. I mean, this is really, and this is a huge burden on people who are, three different shops that are working together. Facilities, communication, community engagement, and academics. We're trying to, I'm glad you're all talking to each other. That's wonderful. But coordinating all that stuff with my schedule alone, not to mention 9 trustees, not to mention communities that are already in an uproar because of certain headlines. I'm not going to go any further with that one. But just saying, I don't know how we're going to do this. My question is, Dr. Cruz, do we need the funds, the possible funds that could come with the possible efficiencies or modernization, whatever you want to call it? You can put a positive spin on it, like Trustee Mathias said. But do we need that money that badly?
Well, certainly the budget isn't final. This would not close the budget, so this would not close the budget deficit. Obviously, it impacts the budget in different ways.
What would not close the budget deficit? What's it?
Closing, consolidating 1 or 2 schools. But that's the purpose of tonight's meeting.
To see if we've got the political, got us to do this, or what?
It's actually about a timeline, to see this timeline that we put forward.
This is too short a timeline, Dr.
And if
Cruz,
it's too
respectfully.
short a
It's too
timeline,
short.
then that's what the feedback we need to hear, that it's too much too soon, that we need to take more time on one particular part or another, given that other items are being introduced. And so it's really to have that public dialogue with the board.
Okay, so this trustee's not ready. This is too short a timeline. I really think that we've got 3 experts here, along with our academics team, who've got way too much to do already anyway. But the collaboration that you've started, and this is a preliminary kind of a thing, the collaborate is excellent. I'm really appreciating the work that's been done already, but this is a complex process. Trustee Ashley said it took the Fab Pack how long to get all of that stuff together so that we could have a successful bond election?
A couple of years.
Couple of years.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear in that, when I first started looking at the timelines, one of the things that I wanted to consider is that if we do make a commitment to improve a receiving facility, if a school does go through consolidations, we do a consolidation, we need to have the time to design the improvements and construct the improvements.
Are you talking just from the operations point of view?
From operations perspective. So if you consider that and work backwards, and knowing that really the only opportunity that we have to implement is in the beginning of a school year, and knowing that the most near-term school year is 2020, then working back, this is the tightest time frame we could have, because we need to have staff design, we need contractors to construct if we're going to improve the facilities to meet that objective.
But that's just from a facilities point of view. So if we put on our collaborative hat, we'd have to engage Mr. Tejas' shop, we'd have to engage Mr. Reach's shop and all of his connections to academics, et cetera, and the superintendent's, and then we'd have to engage the whole board and all of our connections to the community, because we represent the community. We interface with the administration, all that kind of stuff. So this trustee is not ready for this short timeline, but the rest of the trustees can decide on their own if they want to do it. But I would encourage us, if we're going to do right by the communities that have not been done right in the past, that we be more thoughtful and deliberative in our. And I'm looking at administration. I'm not directing anybody to do anything, because God forbid, even though I have the right to do that under the Texas Constitution, that one single trustee would direct staff to do anything. Because I do work as part of a board. This is a collaboration here. It's very clear, the law, all 9 of us, or a majority of us, that's 5 votes, have to agree to anything. We're not voting tonight, by the way. Community, who happens to be up, those of you who are, insomniacs and can't go to sleep. We're not voting on anything tonight. We haven't decided. We don't have a list. We do have a lot of data, and we need to sift through it. And I think all these trustees are sensitive to the emotional component because of all the governmental entities in the world, the trustees of a school district probably have the heaviest emotional load to deal with, because we're talking about kids and staff and families. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Anderson?
I'm going to apologize in advance for what might seem to be a stream of consciousness. I thought of some other things as my colleagues were talking, as well as I may borrow a page from Jamie's repertoire and giving you a list that I don't necessarily need responses to everything tonight, but just some things for us to think about as we're trying to map out and plan when the actual work is going to happen on the part of the trustees. So something Mr. Tejas said that sort of struck me was, or maybe it was Matthias, it was one of the two of you, the timeline is driving the process, not the other way around. And so my concern with that is ensuring that the majority of the board can commit to a timeline that can be taken to the community to set those expectations, and that also sort of aligns with one of the conversations we had in a recent board retreat from Dr. Perry about predictability and moderation and control, being able to give the community some control over, the outcomes, and being mindful of that, because for me, my concern about the 25th and the request to approve a process is that the process won't be defined by the 25th. And so I have a hard time without it being defined, because there's pieces of work that are mapped out, granted, that we won't necessarily even know yet, again, dependent on how involved the board wants to be in some of these different components. We're not quite sure yet, or at least I can't definitively say tonight, and I don't know that we can answer that the next 2 weeks, how long each of those pieces will legitimately take. And so that sort of then leads me to just the timeline in general, because I know I want to be able to commit to something that I know we can stick with. And right now, I think it's a great start to understanding all of the things that need to happen. And also, I think learning more about certain decision points for the administration, like you just articulated, about if we're intending for this to have an impact for an opening in 2020 or 2021, this is how much time we need to do the work. So that is also, I think, really important information that wasn't necessarily articulated in a way that everybody across the community can understand as to why we have to make decision points at certain junctures, and what's really driving those things, and how do we, ensure that we're putting every student in a better facility and improving academic outcomes. And so that's one sort of piece of it for me, is trying to figure out, again, what the board's level of involvement is going to be in different components. I think there was perhaps a difference of perspectives or opinions just in the last board ops meeting about how involved trustees would like to be or can be in the criteria conversation. And I know we have information from the facility master plan, but I think we can all agree that some of these decision points will require a different thought or process that was outlined in the FMP, that perhaps may also impact the schedule of projects, or that was outlined in terms of who needs modernization and facility updates at sort of what time along that 25-year master plan, because this is a change. Same thing with certain expectations set in certain TUP plans. This is a change to that. And so I think we need to allow for some time to sort of reset the needs based on new information and where we are today. And if we're backing into a goal of 2020 or 2021, and for however many potentially impacted campuses, that we're really able to articulate the why beyond changing those things, because otherwise it's just going to be seen as another potential trust issue, or we said one thing and now things are different. And so how do we really communicate that in a way that folks understand why that is the case? And so I think we still need at some point to get somewhat of a consensus around, because we're using criteria and guiding principles and equity policy and all of these things that I'm not sure we've really articulated well enough who's doing what, and also the Fab Pack seemingly doing some work and the BAC, but precisely what each person's or committee's or the board's role is in each, so that we can then map out how long each group needs to do the work and to do it well. Because I know this is such a big issue for us that we want to make the right choices, and we want to make sure that we're taking the time to make the right choices. In terms of Jamie's list, or Trustee Mathias's list rather, of the 10 things missing, he addressed boundary changes and where does that fit into this, and I think it's addressed maybe sort of generically in tier 3 or tier 2, but I would also suggest that there's been some suggestions as well about feeder patterns and vertical teams and things like that, some things require boundary adjustments, some things require simply realigning, but at a secondary level you can realign enrollment by a change in feeder patterns. That I'm not sure where I'm seeing those conversations are sort of intertwined, so that we can effectively say that we're looking at multiple solutions to address each of these issues, whether it's regionally or district-wide, that we're not overlooking interim opportunities to address other things. Along those same lines, and somewhat connected for me to the previous discussion about the budget, I'm also still struggling with, given that 28 of the elementary schools, or 28 of the schools on TUP, so 28 out of 37 are elementary schools, I'm still not seeing what our sort of definitive plan is on addressing the elementary enrollment challenge, other than, we keep reiterating that we're going to lose on average of 1,200 to 1,500, or sometimes it's 1,400, but I feel like there's an opportunity for additional strategies that may or may not have a fiscal impact, but I'm not sure we've articulated what our focus is on that as well, which could play an impact in how many schools get addressed by something. I want to make sure we're conscientious of that piece as well. And then, sorry, I'm trying to make sure I covered everything on my list. The June decision point, if we could get some more clarity around, it suggests that we're looking to identify a multi-year, multi-region and or campus plan in June that is not just sort of the next year. And so, but I'm not sure that's clear to everybody. Is June just the list of potential campuses impacted for 1920, 2021? I think to some of the concerns raised about community engagement and how those things are framed is going to drive the kind of engagement and participation we get, as well as I think to Trustee Mathias's point about how are we going to ensure that with each of these campus communities, once we get to that point and we have a list compared to now where we don't, how do we ensure that we're engaging with folks that aren't coming to us, and changing that strategy a little bit to ensure that we've actually communicated with and received feedback from and had an opportunity to engage with folks that are directly impacted by these sorts of decisions. And so I guess if we could just, at some point before the end of the night, help us plan the work and thinking through how we're going to schedule it and who's going to do what, I think it would be something that would be really helpful to leave with tonight, so that we can get some consensus for you around a timeline and come back to the community with something that we know is realistic and that's going to cover what I think we all intend to cover, and ensuring that we're giving it enough thought and we've got all the information that we need to be able to make those decision points.
We're going to be here till morning, I think. Sorry. I know, like the sun's going to rise pretty soon. Okay, so where to begin? Oh, yes, equity. Some of you have already mentioned that, but yeah, like that's something that I think we need to make very explicit in whatever we come up with. throughout, like every page should have something on it that addresses, that demonstrates to the community that we truly are looking at this whole process through an equity lens, and really make it more salient. And use the terms like, and maybe these are things that will come out of the whole process, but, use terms like making our campuses more integrated, or, talking more explicitly about bringing wonderful programs to some of our under-enrolled schools in East Austin, and that type of thing. Like, that just needs to be a lot more salient if we're going to be able to build trust with people who are going to be impacted by this. I guess a missing piece for me also is that, I guess it is related to the trust. I know a lot of times I've never lived in poverty, but so it's very easy for me, like when people say, okay, we're going to do this for you, generally they do. Because they know that I and people like me will have the resources to go after them if things don't happen, if they don't come to fruition. That is not necessarily the case for people living in poverty, and so we have to really acknowledge that as a district, and know that just saying, hey, you're going to get this amazing thing. We may have to close down your school, but you're going to get something amazing in return. That's not going to be enough, because people have made promises before. If you look at the literature on poverty and all of that, there is a lack of trust that's just inherent there. And so we have to give more. And so I want us to really think about, when we do the community engagement, that we start from like a different mindset. Like, we need people who are from these communities determining what that community engagement is going to look like. Maybe it's going out to the churches and, it's doing different things. It's talking to people about, it's not saying, hey, what do you think about, how can we develop more 21st century learning in your school? It could be something more like, tell me about what keeps you up at night, about your kids' education, and just building that relationship and showing that we really care. So I just want to see that built into whatever process we have, which just got to be more salient, because we're not all the same. And I think our SEL people can be really helpful with that, and I know that they've been doing some work with our community outreach as well. And I would also just say we need to really prime some of our audiences, like, when we're talking about boundary changes, the reason we haven't done that yet, I think, is because it's hard to do. There are a lot of people who don't want to change. They've moved into a certain neighborhood, and because they wanted to go to the school, and they don't want to change. But I think if we start our community engagement sessions with folks with just an education on their own implicit biases and things like that, and sort of prime them to this is not just a conversation about a school consolidation or a boundary change. This is really about you and your implicit biases, and really be honest with yourself. And that's when you kind of get to that root, those emotions, and help people really see the bigger picture here, so that we can move forward. I hope that made sense, but that's all I'm going to say. It's 12:30.
Made a lot of sense to me. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to agree with a lot of people tonight. And I want to start with when we started FabPack. It was such an intentional and new process for us that I went to all the first rounds of meetings to get to know the players, to get to understand how it was working with administration and all of this, so that I could have trust in the system personally. Because I knew we needed to do something different. I had been here when we had tried to go forward with the 2013 bond, which only half of it passed. And so I knew we needed to change. So one of the things that I would guess, and I might look to Trustee Ashe, is it started out and the administration had basically a pretty quick timeline that they wanted the group to work through. And it became apparent really quickly that that community wanted to do it differently, and what they were given the freedom to do was learn, work together, understand the issues, work with the community, and then they decided when to go forward with the bond. They didn't work backward. You know, there were a lot of people that wanted the bond quickly because we needed the bond quickly. But because we did allow them the time to do the work well, we got to the point we wanted much later than some people, but we still got there, and now no one remembers that we were delayed in that. And so I guess my question is, with regard to the timeline, do we want to do it, do we want to do all of this in a time-sensitive way, or do we want to do it right? And that is not rhetorical.
Of course, I'll start, you can add in anything else. Of course, we want to do it right. I do think the issues about trust, I do think the issues around understanding these very complex items, and where the agenda item actually says, where it talks about the policy, and it goes into boundaries, programming, consolidations, repurposing, when we're also working in a collaborative way with the city. I think that was another entity coming forward to say, we're dealing with some city issues. It's not independent to the city or independent to the district, and just really wanting to come together. But obviously, we want to do things right and build trust along the way.
So-
That's, of course, is essential.
So with that in mind, I just, I do appreciate, there's such really good parameters around this work. It's given us an understanding of all the pieces that need to take place, and I don't want to lose that. I do want to thank you for that. I think that we could have this conversation better after the equity, inclusion, and board policy work happens, after we know some things that the city might be interested in. And at that point, we have some guideline information, I hate to keep using the word criteria because I think it's more than the criteria. I mean, for me, what we're asking the board to do is that tier 3 is put in the local needs, whether it's equity or communication, or, you know, we have this bigger picture than a lot of people are able to have because we have these multiple conversations. But I mean, even if we just shifted everything out, so there were no decisions asked of the board until at least that piece was done. And then to Trustee Anderson's point is, the takeaway, I think, from this board tonight is, how do we get that, how do we do our work that will then inform that next piece? I hate to send you out to the community with, well, we don't know. And we're going out pretty quick with a whole lot of meetings that are going to say, well, we're waiting on this and we don't know this. So let's know some things before we really launch a huge communication effort, would be my request. And so with that, I think that you would need a commitment from this board on, do we want to own the equity inclusion policy? Do we want to do that work and maybe put it ahead of some other things that, I mean, for me, I feel like this is putting stress on the 2025 strategic plan. And so I think we have to make that very explicit that we may be pushing your timeline there. I still think that there are some things that fit into, I mean, boundary changes. If we just, I mean, I think there's some really evident ones that we could do without all of this big stuff that would get us moving in some of these directions, where we can have intentional conversations with specific communities and not have this kind of overwhelming 20-year plan by June kind of thing. I did want to ask, is this a multi-year, or are you hoping to get a multi-year strategy?
So in the addendum that was going to be in 2019 FMP, the goal is to lay out the solution for each. Apologies. Would be to communicate to the trustees the solution for any grouping of facilities or campuses. Now, how we implement that, it in many cases probably will be 1 or 2 years. I don't know what that looks like yet. I think the idea is that whatever we presented would be the plan to essentially get us to be healthier across the district, period. Now, how we choose to implement that, whether it's a year or 2, I would come back to y'all and say, these are the constraints that you have in front of you. This is the exchange you're going to give up in value, or these are the costs that you might incur if you do it this way. But the intent is that all these solutions would be embedded within addendum. How it rolls out will be based on discussions that we have with the trustees.
So I know there are people in the community that are just getting really antsy about this, but they were getting antsy at about the bond too. So I just think that they have to respect that we really want to do this right in a way that our community believes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the decisions and the processes fall into place in a way that this timeline doesn't feel like we're going to be able to do that. So that's kind of where most of my thoughts were around here too. And just as we're building, when we do get back to building, if we change this and we build out something, I do have to make a point of, I am uncomfortable with several parts of the communication plan that actually say we are going to announce things to the media on a Friday, and then the board's going to talk about it on a Monday. That seems a very backward setup, because then when they call us and ask for our input, we don't have anything we can add or say to support the work. So I feel like there's some work that we need to do just in our own processes to really understand what needs to happen before the next thing needs to happen. And so I would like this to be pushed a little at best. I'm not ready to vote in February, but I don't think it would have to be that long if we are able to do that first board work and really get our hands around what we're talking about in a way that's a little bit more solid. So, my 2 cents. The equity work, yes, and the policy, if you want us to do, is it CL, local?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if we want it.
CT.
It's the L that was thrown, the local that was thrown me. CT local, I think that's that seems to be our work, that when President Rodriguez asked us to think about this in terms of our work, I feel like that's what you've asked for, and I'm not sure if everybody's committed to that work, but I think that's our first step.
Okay.
I'm going to go next, and then Trustee Tice, and then Trustee Wagner. And I'll be pretty brief. Arthi, thank you for your comments, because it started, actually I had these questions for the trustees, but your comments made me think about the belief that this board wants to do the right thing. And I can't help but be reminded when you started talking about having poverty-informed criteria, of the fact that it wasn't too long that I was the first one to have graduated from high school with my entire family, and then gone to college and law school. And I think about my parents and what they would want. They want their kids to go to 21st century environments. They wanted a focus on student outcomes where their kids could do better than they can. I think for me, the 3 questions I had is actually not for Dr. Cruz and not for our panelists, but actually for us as trustees. They are, do you or do you not want to take ownership of the goal of creating an equity policy? And if so, who's interested? And we'll get to work on that. 2, are there guardrails that we want to agree or share? I think some of us have kind of done that a little bit. The ones I might add in addition to equity is whether or not there's an analysis of a disproportionate discrimination around it. Some of the things that Trustee Letitia Anderson talked about gentrification, some of those other issues. And I think most importantly, I think as I listened to some of the comments is, do you want more meetings to discuss the criteria, the principles, the processes? Because we're going to have to add some meetings. I know Dr. Cruz has suggested, I don't know if it was in the material that you suggested a couple more meetings. I don't know what to call them, work sessions, retreat B, 100 of the other. But whatever they are, because I think that there's not enough time to kind of get into all of this, but I think there's a desire to move. And so how can we kind of balance the two? We're not going to get answers tonight, but I thought I'd share that with you all. And then Trustee Taish, and then Trustee Wagner.
So I'm willing to work on a plan. You can put my name down, an equity plan. So I'm holding in my hand probably about, I don't know, 2 pounds of backup material that's excellent, including your slides here. So is this going to go up on our website? Is all this backup material that we've got, all these wonderful maps? Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Appreciate that very much. All the statistics, is that all going to go up on our website?
Yeah, it's been on the website since it went live on Friday.
All of this is on there?
Yes. I'm sorry, the presentation was added today.
The presentation was added today.
You received it Friday in your folders, and then I emailed it to you again this morning when we added it.
Gosh, my secretary missed that again. I'm
With
going
all
to
due
fire her.
respect, the presentation is online?
Yes, sir.
This is right here.
This trustee is not seeing it online. I'm happy for her.
And while you're doing that, let me give a little update on the broken link issue. I got an update from Mr. Tejas. Google controls our searches, and Google has been asked, there was a request submitted in November of 2018 for some kind of pathway thing, it's mysterious to me, to take place so that people who search our website can find things. And that's a request that's in queue with some other requests. And we sent that request to California. Mr. Tass, could you elaborate on that? Because I'm trying to understand why, or explain why we've had the broken link thing.
So the issue is when you actually do a search for content on the AISD website through Google. When we got a new website, you lose all of the old pages, and Google had kind of learned the pathways to all of our, it's learned the pathways to all of our sites, and so that's what it's telling you in your search results.
Okay.
And so it learns it over time. However, we have submitted a new sitemap to Google in November.
Okay.
And so the best way that we can tell people to look for things that they're looking for, where you might normally search in Google, which is a common thing for people to do, search for it on our actual website that knows where to search for things on our website, in the search box on our website.
And that request went to Google in California, correct? That request to do all this mysterious stuff that's going to happen that I don't understand?
I believe that's where the sitemap was
Okay.
set.
So, to our viewing public, that's one of the reasons we're having trouble. When I had trouble trying to find stuff, and I thought I'd interject that because I think Trustee Wagner was going to explain it earlier, and we got lost in my dramatics earlier. So, I thought I'd bring it up when we're looking for all this stuff here. And did y'all find it? Did he find it? Did you find it, Trustee Mathias? Okay, got it. Okay, so that's that. That particular issue. I think that was the only question that I had, was about, whether or not this would all be and when it was loaded and all that kind of thing. So, because I think it's really important that the public really pay attention, particularly those people who really get upset about, boundary changes and demographics and all that kind of thing, and who don't understand, what's going on. And by the way, it would take me probably, I don't know, about a year to go through all this and I really understand it. So.
All right, well,
Sorry,
I'll try and go quickly. I know I'm the only thing standing between us and going home at this point.
Actually, Trustee Anderson asked
Okay.
to speak.
Okay. So that means I can take all my time I want? No, I'm just kidding. I think that the one thing I just wanted to kind of offer up is that it seems like we have sort of a pattern as a board, and that is whenever we reach a hard decision or a tough conversation, that we tend to go into kind of, for lack of a better term, analysis paralysis mode. And we can come up with all the reasons in the world to continue to study and engage and research on this particular topic. We have done equity studies. We have had an equity subcommittee. We have had equity plans. We have done copious amounts of work around equity, which to me begs the question of what are we going to do this time that's going to yield a different result or yield different information than we've already collected in the past. Again, too, when we start to examine underutilized schools, these are things that we've looked at for years now. We've had the information. We've talked about TUP plans. We've talked about all this information. Additionally, with boundaries, it seems like we keep coming back to boundaries as sort of this silver bullet. But I can say after years of sitting on the Boundary Advisory Committee, when you really break the map out and you look at where the schools are located within the attendance areas and where the over-enrolled schools are and the under-enrolled schools are, we've made all the shifts on the map that we can really effectively make when it comes to boundaries. Boundaries are not going to get us to the end state that we're seeking. So it feels to me like we're continuing to perpetuate these conversations rather than confronting the difficult decisions that we actually need to make. And at this point, I know we have a very aggressive timeline in front of us. My concerns regarding that timeline are regarding the availability and bandwidth of the Fab Pack to be able to do that work, as well as the availability and bandwidth of our staff to be able to do that work. I know that we're incredibly short-staffed, particularly in our facilities teams, in terms of being able to manage through the work with the Fab Pack, and that's concerning to me. Beyond that, though, if we have the resources and the time available to do that, then I don't see a reason not to continue to move this forward. We're in a place now where we have students who are sitting in extraordinarily under-enrolled schools, which are not strong educational environments for them. We have students sitting in crumbling buildings that could be put into modernized schools. We have a lot of opportunities in front of us available to our students if we have the courage as a board to step up and move forward, rather than continuing to examine and check every box 3 times over. So what this trustee feels is that we need to be able to just take the step forward and do the hard work and make the hard decisions, because our students are not getting the best possible educational environments with us continuing to stall and put off the decision making.
Trustee Anderson.
I'll try to make this brief and not confusing. I just wanted to sort of say for the record that the work around drafting an equity policy is a little bit more complex than most might think, because typically our local policies are based off of legal policy. There is no example of a legal policy in the state of Texas that I have found. That being said, I think the equity policy is one piece to it. It's what you do with that that requires another conversation and some strategy around how you're going to implement that equity policy. So for me in the research that I've done, it's really a 2-part sort of piece of work. It's getting a consensus around what equity means to everybody in the district and how we define it and how we want to apply it from a general perspective. But then there's also the piece of how does that change what we do as an organization. And an example from one district is a 2-year implementation plan that's broken out into things like hiring, professional development, climate, things like that. And so I think that's the other piece of the work that we need to account for, unless and we haven't gotten the full direction from the board yet, which we're intending to do so in one of our upcoming retreats or meetings, about the scope of that work and a consensus from majority of the trustees around what that scope looks like. Is it just one piece? Is it both? But essentially what I think we need to get to is how does that fit into this? Because it's different than just the tiers of criteria may apply in different ways or different weights that may be impacted by different regional needs. And so in order to have some clarity to the communities as to how the stuff gets applied, I think my perspective is that we need some additional work on something that allows us to be as transparent as possible, that clearly defines what triggers what, as opposed to if you put these things together, one person might come away with this takeaway and somebody else might come away with something different. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I think we need some clarity from the board around what that equity work looks like, and that is going to impact potentially the timeline, just to make sure that we're addressing that piece in the way that the board believes is necessary.
Trustee Anderson, Trustee Ashe. Sorry. Come on.
I think that one of the other things too that I think I would like for us to bring back to board ops is, I think pretty collectively we've said we're not comfortable with or that there's been some hesitation to the current timeline. What would be our timeline? And I think that's something that we've done, we as a board, and I'm going to say the word we, even though I'm relatively new to the board, but I think as a board, our history has presented itself as not wanting to put any limitations on ourselves or to try to set timeline goals. But I think that could be something that might actually provide some reassurance that we are going to continue forward with the honest work of what we're trying to look to. And I would think it would be something for us either to bring to board ops, is to really kind of sit down and say, what is our timeline? What are we looking at? Can we put something forward that says, I'm comfortable with us having meaningful conversations and decisions made in this area or this span of time with this amount of community engagement, with this amount, or amount, that's kind of a tough thing to say. Oh, okay, we've had 12 community engagements, we're good. No, but I mean, just kind of trying to really get our arms wrapped around what we can honestly say. And I believe that would go a long way with the trust and with people feeling like we are being good stewards of the money and the responsibilities that we are placed with.
Thank you. Any other, Trustee Tyson?
So just want to make note that we could pretend we're on San Francisco time because it's only 10:49 there. I want to take this opportunity to move us away from this conversation, if possible. So if there's anybody else who wants to say something about this particular issue, this particular topic, please do it now, because I'd like to move us away.
Trustee Allen?
I was just, if I could write down the people that are interested in working on policy, then
Yep.
I think I've got Ann.
Okay.
Cindy? Oh, sorry. I'm trying to get who wants to work on the policy. So we've got Ann, Cindy.
Trustee Letitia
Oh,
Anderson.
sorry. Trustee, both the Anderson. Trustee Singh. Well, it could be a subcommittee, or that's the question I'm kind of getting to her. Is there a subcommittee of the board, or we want to do it as a full board?
Making a decision that we need an equity policy. I mean, we haven't even had that.
Well,
think
we've
the
got
board
5
is-
people, we've got 5 people right now that have said they want to do that, so that would be a majority. So we could let 5 people go and work on it, or we could schedule time as a full board. So that's my question, to follow your question.
That's a good governance question.
So, right now, and I'll put my name on there. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I don't know if you said. And
That's
Trustee
6.
Ashe, did you say no, yes? You're indifferent? Okay. Okay, thank you.